When my daughter told me she was too busy to pick me up from the airport, I thought it was just a bad day for her. But that same night, my phone lit up with 22 missed calls from her number, and what I found when I finally answered changed everything. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss any of our future stories. My name is Daniel, and I had been counting the days until my flight landed back home. I'd been away for several weeks, and all I wanted was to see my daughter Claire have dinner together and maybe talk the way we used to when life felt lighter. The flight had been long. My legs stiff from the cramped seat, but I still felt a small rush of excitement as the plane touched down. While waiting for my suitcase at the baggage carousel, I called Claire, expecting her to say she was on her way. Instead, her voice was short, almost impatient. She told me she was too busy, that she had things to take care of, and I should just grab a taxi. I asked if something was wrong, but she brushed me off, saying she'd talk to me later, then ended the call. I stood there for a moment, the noise of the airport crowd dulling in my ears, feeling the sting of her tone more than her words. It wasn't just about the ride. It was how easily she dismissed me as if I was just another task she didn't have time for. I left the airport quietly, got into a taxi, and watched the city blur past in the dim evening light. By the time I reached my house, the street lamps had flickered on, bathing the empty street in a yellow glow. I made myself a simple meal, set my phone face down on the table, and tried to let it go. Hours later, when I finally turned it over, the screen lit up and I froze. There were 22 missed calls from Claire. I stared at the glowing numbers on the screen, feeling my chest tighten. 22 missed calls wasn't an accident, and it definitely wasn't casual. My thumb hovered over the call log, but I didn't press anything. Instead, I scrolled through the timestamps. They'd started just after 9 p.m. and kept coming every few minutes until almost midnight. In between, there were 2 short text messages. "Call me, it's important," and then, a little later, "Please answer." I sat back in my chair, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the house. My first instinct was to call her right away, but then the memory of her voice from earlier, cold, rushed, distant rose in my mind. I wondered what had changed so suddenly. Was it trouble with her boyfriend, or maybe something had happened to her car, or was it something worse? My hand stayed still on the table, the phone lying there like it was waiting for me to make a decision. For years, I had been the one to drop everything and come running whenever she needed help. Tonight, for the first time, I didn't move. I just sat there watching the screen go dark again, wondering if she was going to keep calling or if the next thing I'd get would be a knock at my door. It was close to 1 in the morning when the first knock came. Not a polite tap, but a sharp, hurried rapping that echoed through the quiet house. I didn't get up right away. Part of me thought it might just be a neighbor, or maybe I was imagining it after sitting in silence for so long. Then the knocking came again, faster this time, followed by a voice calling my name. It was Claire. I walked slowly to the door, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor. When I opened it, she was standing there, hair, tangled eyes, red from crying. She looked smaller somehow, like the confident young woman who had brushed me off hours earlier had been stripped away. "Dad, I'm sorry, I know it's late, but I didn't know where else to go," she said, her voice shaking. Behind her, the street was empty except for a black car idling at the corner, its headlights cutting across the wet pavement. My stomach tightened. I glanced at the car, then back at her, and asked, "What happened?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder like she wasn't sure if she should speak here or inside. That's when I noticed her hands trembling. Something was very wrong. I stepped aside and let Claire in, the night air slipping past me as she hurried inside and shut the door. She stood in the middle of the living room, arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was trying to hold in whatever had just happened. I switched on the lamp beside my chair, the warm light spilling over her face, and I could see she'd been crying for a long time. Her makeup was smudged, her cheeks blotchy, and there was a small tear along the sleeve of her jacket. I asked again, more firmly this time. "What happened?" She glanced toward the front window, then lowered her voice. "It's Evan," she whispered, her words trembling. "We had a fight, a bad one." Evan was her boyfriend, the one I had never trusted from the start. He was the kind of man who had a smile for everyone in public but a sharp edge behind closed doors. I'd warned her about him more than once, but she always said I didn't understand him. I leaned back slightly, trying to keep my voice calm. "What kind of fight?" She shook her head, rubbing at her arms like she was cold, even though the house was warm. He threw my phone at the wall. "It's broken. I borrowed my neighbor's to call you. But when you didn't answer..." She paused, swallowing hard, her eyes darting toward the window again. "I think he followed me here." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I glanced toward the front of the house, where the faint beam of the car's headlights still cut across the curtains. "Is he out there right now?" I asked. She nodded, barely, as if saying it too loudly might make it more real. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. The same black car sat idling, engine running. No one getting out. I let the curtain fall back into place and turned to Claire. "You should have told me this before you even went with him," I said, not out of anger, but from the kind of frustration only a parent can feel when they see danger coming long before their child does. She dropped her gaze to the floor, her voice almost a whisper. "I didn't think it would get this bad." The sound of the car's engine outside seemed to grow louder, a low, constant hum in the background. Something told me this wasn't just going to be a conversation. Whatever was waiting outside my house wasn't going to leave quietly. I told Claire to sit on the couch while I went to the kitchen for a moment, not because I needed anything in there, but because I needed a second to think. My mind was moving fast, running through every possible way this night could go wrong. I grabbed the old cordless phone from its charger, the one I hardly ever used anymore, and brought it back with me. She was sitting forward, elbows on her knees, eyes fixed on the carpet like she was trying to disappear into it. I sat across from her, the phone resting on my knee. "Claire, I need you to tell me everything, not just about tonight, everything he's done. I can't help you if I don't know the truth." She looked up at me, hesitant, but I could see something in her finally give way. "It started months ago," she said softly. "Little things at first. He'd get angry if I didn't answer a text fast enough or if I stayed too long at work. Then he started going through my phone, accusing me of things. Tonight we argued because I told him I wanted to spend the weekend alone. He grabbed my bag and dumped it out. When I tried to leave, he blocked the door." Her voice cracked on that last sentence. She took a shaky breath before continuing. "I managed to get out when he went to the kitchen, but he followed me all the way to the street. I thought I lost him when I got on the bus, but..." Her eyes shifted toward the front of the house again. "I saw that car in my neighborhood earlier today. It's his." I stood and walked to the window again, careful not to move the curtain too much. The car was still there, same headlights slicing through the darkness, engine still humming. The driver's silhouette sat motionless behind the wheel. My gut tightened. This wasn't someone just dropping by. This was a man waiting for the right moment. I turned back to Claire. "We can call the police right now. They can be here in minutes." She shook her head quickly. "If we do that, he'll make it worse later. You don't know him like I do." That made me angry, not at her, but at the fact she'd been pushed into a place where fear was controlling her more than common sense. The hum of the car's engine seemed to press against the walls of the house. I could feel my own pulse in my ears, every muscle in my body tight. "Then you're not staying here tonight," I said firmly. "You're not going home either. He'll take you somewhere safe." Her eyes widened, where I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I wasn't entirely sure where yet. All I knew was that we needed to move, and that whoever was sitting outside in that car was not going to watch us walk out without a reaction. And I was already preparing myself for the moment that door opened. I went to the hall closet and pulled out my old winter coat, the heavy one. With deep pockets, I slipped the cordless phone into one and grabbed my truck keys from the hook. Claire watched me, her arms still wrapped tight around herself. "You're really going to take me out there? What if he follows us?" she asked, her voice thin. "He's already following you," I said, zipping my coat. "But if we move smart, he won't know where we're going." I turned off the living room light, leaving only the small lamp in the corner, enough to keep the house from looking abandoned, but dim enough that he couldn't see us moving around. Claire stood up slowly, her movements uncertain, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. Part of her wanted to trust me completely. The other part was still tangled up in fear of Evans. Next move, I stepped to the window again and angled the curtain just enough to peek outside. The black car was still there, but now the driver's door had opened slightly. A leg rested out like he was thinking about getting out, but hadn't committed yet. My grip on the curtain tightened. This wasn't a man just watching anymore. He was preparing himself for something. I moved back from the window. "Change of plan," I said. "We're not walking out the front. Well, go out the back through the alley. My truck is parked 2 blocks over. If we keep to the side streets, we can get out without him seeing us. Leave." Claire frowned. 2 blocks. Why is your truck that far?" "I had the driveway redone last week. Been parking down there until the concrete sets," I said, waving off the question. But the real reason was simpler. It never liked keeping my vehicle directly in front of the house where it could be blocked in. Tonight that habit might save us. I went to the kitchen and unlocked the back door, the cold air rushing in. Claire hesitated at the threshold, glancing over her shoulder toward the front of the house. "What if he tries to come in?" she whispered. I leaned close so she could hear me without raising my voice. "If he tries, I'm still holding the phone. We'll call the police before he gets 2 steps inside." We slipped out into the night, the door closing with a soft click behind us. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the wet pavement. I kept her close, my hand lightly gripping her arm, not to control her, but to keep her moving. The alley was quiet, except for the distant hum of the car engine from the front street. Every step seemed louder than it should, my boots crunching on the gravel, her sneakers making soft scuffs. We reached the end of the block and turned left, the truck now just a few yards ahead. That's when I heard it, the sudden slam of a car door followed by footsteps echoing against the wet asphalt. And they weren't moving away from us. They were getting closer. I didn't need to turn around to know it was him. The rhythm of the footsteps was sharp, determined, the kind that meant whoever was behind us wasn't just out for a walk. Claire's hand tightened around my arm, her breathing quickening. "Dad is coming," she whispered, her voice breaking. I kept my pace steady, not wanting to break into a run and trigger his. "Get in the truck as soon as we reach it," I told her. "Don't look back. Don't say a word." The sound of the footsteps grew louder, bouncing off the narrow alley walls. I could hear the faint jingle of keys or metal in his pocket, and then a voice low but carrying just enough to make my stomach turn. "Claire, stop." It wasn't a shout. It was worse. It was the kind of voice that sounded calm but was ready to snap. We reached the side street where my truck was parked under the shadow of a big oak tree. I fished the keys from my pocket and clicked the fob. The truck's lights flashed once, cutting through the darkness. That small burst of light must have been enough to tell him where we were, because his footsteps quickened. Claire rushed to the passenger side, her fingers fumbling for the handle. I opened my door and slid in just as she climbed into her seat. Before I even shut my door, I could see him from the corner of my eye, Evan tall, broad-shouldered, his face pale under the streetlight. His jacket was unzipped and he was gripping something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was. I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. Evan stepped into the street, positioning himself right in front of the truck. His other hand shot up, palm out, as if daring me to try and drive around him. Claire's voice shook beside me. "Dad, just go." I gripped the steering wheel, my mind flashing through every bad outcome. Running him down would land me in jail. Staying put would give him control. And reversing out would take too long. He started shouting now, words spilling out so fast they barely made sense. Accusations, demands, and threats. I leaned my head out the window, just enough to let my voice cut through his. "Get out of the way. Right now." He laughed, a short, cold sound. "She's coming with me." That was it. The moment I felt something snap inside. Not fear, not anger, just a hard certainty that there was no way this man was leaving with her tonight. I shifted the truck into gear, keeping my foot pressed on the brake, the engine rumbling loud enough to shake the air between us. He didn't move, but his grip tightened on whatever he was holding. The street was empty. No witnesses, no one to intervene. The only sound was the truck's engine and Claire's uneven breathing beside me. And I knew if I made the wrong choice in the next 5 seconds, everything would spiral out of control. I kept my eyes locked on his, the truck vibrating under my grip on the wheel. Claire's hand brushed my arm, her voice barely a whisper. "Please don't get out." She was right. I knew if I stepped out, things could turn ugly fast, but staying still wasn't an option either. Evan shifted his stance, his boots scraping against the wet pavement like he was daring me to make the first move. The thing in his hand finally caught the light. It wasn't a weapon, but it wasn't harmless either. A heavy metal flashlight, the kind that could do serious damage if swung the wrong way. I raised my voice, steady and clear. "Last warning. Move for a split second." Something in his expression faltered, but then he stepped closer, the beam of a nearby street lamp stretching his shadow across my hood. I pressed harder on the brake, just enough to make the truck inch forward an inch at a time. The tires hissed against the wet street. He stopped, moving, his jaw tightening, his eyes darting between me and Claire. That tiny hesitation told me he wasn't as sure of himself as he wanted us to think I took advantage of it. With my left hand, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the cordless phone I'd brought from the house. I didn't break eye contact with him as I held it up where he could see it. "I can call the police right now. They'll be here before you take 2 steps. And if you think standing in the street with that thing in your hand is going to look good for you, go ahead and find out." His jaw shifted, and I could see the calculation running through his head. Trouble with the police wasn't something he wanted tonight. He stepped back just 1 step, but it was enough for me to steer around him. My foot lifted off the brake and the truck rolled forward, slow at first, then faster as I gave it more gas. I didn't look in the mirrors until we reached the next corner. When I finally glanced back, the black car was still there in the distance, headlights glowing faintly through the rain. Evan was no longer in the street. He was standing at the curb watching us go. That stare followed us until the turn took him out of sight. Claire sat stiff in her seat, both hands gripping the strap of her bag like it was the only thing keeping her together. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Somewhere he won't think to look," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. My mind was already running through possibilities, places far enough from here that he couldn't just circle the block and find us, but close enough that we could reach them quickly. The rain started again, tapping against the windshield, and every so often I checked the mirror, even though I couldn't see his car. Anymore, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night wasn't done with us yet. I drove without speaking for the first few minutes, my hands gripping the wheel a little tighter than necessary. The roads were slick, each streetlight stretching into a long blur on the wet pavement. Claire sat rigid beside me, staring out her window as if she was afraid to turn her head. I could feel the tension rolling off her in waves, like every nerve in her body was on high alert. "Claire," I said finally, my voice quieter than I expected. "Where exactly does he think you'd go if you left him?" She didn't answer right away. Her fingers fiddled with the zipper of her bag, pulling it up and down without opening it. "Home," she said finally, though the words sounded uncertain, or to one of my friends from work. "Does he know where they live?" I asked. She nodded, her voice dropping. "Yeah, he's met most of them." That was exactly what I was afraid of. Going to a friend's house wasn't an option. And if she thought coming to my place was safe tonight, had already proven otherwise. "Then we're not going to any of those places," I said. "I'm taking you somewhere else. Somewhere quiet." Her eyes shifted to me for the first time since we'd pulled away. "Where I've got the keys to a cabin about 30 minutes from here," I told her. "Belongs to an old buddy of mine. No one knows about it but me and him. He's down in Florida for the winter, so it's empty. We can stay there until we figure out what to do next." She nodded. Though her hands were still trembling slightly, the sound of the rain on the windshield filled the space between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. We passed through smaller side streets, weaving between neighborhoods to avoid the main roads. Every time I came to an intersection, I checked the mirrors looking for any sign of headlights trailing us. Nothing still. I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there he was circling, waiting for a chance to catch up. After about 15 minutes, we crossed the old bridge that led toward the outskirts of town. The city lights began to thin, replaced by stretches of dark fields and patches of woods. Out here, the road was almost completely empty. I could feel the air in the truck shift slightly. Claire had leaned back against the seat, her breathing more even, like the distance was putting a small barrier between her and whatever had just happened. But I knew this wasn't over, Claire. I said again, my eyes still on the road. "You need to tell me something and I want the truth. Has he ever hurt you before?" "Tonight." She hesitated, and that pause told me more than any words could. Finally she said, "Not like tonight, but yeah. A couple of times, he'd grab my arm or push me if we were arguing. Nothing serious, at least. That's what I told myself. But it's been getting worse lately." The admission made my stomach clench. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing myself to focus on the yellow lines ahead. "You can't go back to him," I said each word slow and firm. "Not after this. Not after following you to my house. I know she," said her voice breaking slightly. I didn't know how to leave. He always made it seem like I couldn't do anything without him, and I believed it for a long time." I glanced at her, seeing the weight in her eyes. "Well, you're not alone now, and you don't have to believe him anymore." The road curved sharply, leading us deeper into the wooded area where the cabin was. The trees on either side leaned in close, their branches swaying in the wind, and for a while it felt like the rest of the world had fallen away. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but every so often a drop would slide down the glass in front of me, catching the glow of the headlights. Claire shifted in her seat, looking over her shoulder at the empty road behind us. "I don't see his car," she said quietly. "That's good," I replied, though I didn't let my guard down. "But we're not going to assume he's given up." She looked forward again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, what if he shows up at the cabin?" I shook my head. "He won't. He doesn't know. It exists, and even if he somehow did, he'd have to get past me first." She didn't respond, but she leaned a little closer to the door, as if putting more space between herself and the center of the road made her feel safer. I didn't mind. She needed whatever sense of control she could get right now. The last 10 minutes of the drive were silent. Finally, we turned off the main road onto a gravel path. The sound of the tires crunching over the stones was loud in the stillness. A small wooden cabin came into view, its porch light glowing faintly in the rain. I pulled up close, cut the engine, and let the quiet settle in. Claire let out a slow breath, as if she'd been holding it since we left my house. But even here in the middle of nowhere, I could see the tension still in her shoulders, because we both knew this wasn't the end. This was just the first place where she could stop running long enough to figure out what came next. And something told me Evan wasn't the type to let go without a fight. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time we stepped out of the truck, but the air was still heavy with that damp, earthy smell you only get out in the woods. The gravel crunched under our shoes as we walked toward the porch. Claire kept glancing over her shoulder, even though there was nothing but blackness behind us. I understood why. Fear doesn't just go away when the danger's out of sight. It sits there waiting, ready to come back the moment you let your guard down. I pulled the cabin key from my pocket and unlocked the door. The hinges gave a soft groan as it swung open, and the faint smell of cedar and dust drifted out. I flicked on the light, revealing a small but warm space. A worn leather couch, a brick fireplace, and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been touched in months. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. "Go ahead and sit down," I told Claire, setting my keys on the counter. She moved to the couch, but instead of sitting back, she perched on the edge like she was ready to spring up again. I knew that look. It was the same one people had in waiting rooms before bad news. I went to the kitchen, filled the kettle with water, and set it on the stove. The quiet tick of the gas flame filled the space. "You want tea or coffee?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, steady. "Tea," she said softly. As the water heated, I took the chance to check my phone. No missed calls from Evan's number at least not yet, but I wasn't about to assume he'd just gone home. Men like him didn't stop because they got cold feet. They stopped when they were forced to. When I brought her the tea, she wrapped her hands around the mug like she needed the warmth to keep herself grounded. For a while, the only sound was the soft patter of rain on the roof. Then she spoke, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from her cup. "Do you think he's going to come here?" she asked. "No," I said firmly, though the truth was, I couldn't be certain he doesn't know where this place is, and I don't plan on letting him find out. She nodded, but I could see doubt in her eyes. She took a sip of tea, then set the mug down and started twisting the sleeve of her sweater. I don't even know why I stayed with him so long. Every time I tried to leave, he'd promise things would change, and sometimes it would for a few weeks. Then it'd go right back to the same. "That's how people like him work," I said. "They give you just enough to make you think things can be different, but it's not about change, it's about control." Her lips pressed together and she blinked quickly like she was trying not to cry. "I thought if I could just keep him calm, keep things smooth, he wouldn't," she trailed off, but I knew the rest of the sentence. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Claire, none of this is your fault. You hear me? Not a single thing." She gave a small nod, but her shoulders were still tight, her body still coiled like a spring. I knew the night wasn't over for her, even if it was quiet here. I stood and went to the small coat closet by the door. Inside was a stack of blankets and an old shotgun my friend kept for wildlife. I took it out, checked that it was loaded, then leaned it against the wall near the couch. Claire's eyes widened slightly. "You really think you'll need that?" she asked. "I think it's better to have it and not need it than the other way around," I said. She didn't argue. Around midnight, the rain finally stopped. The woods outside went silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I went to check the front porch, scanning the gravel drive. Nothing. No headlights, no sound of tires, just stillness. When I came back inside, Claire was curled up on the couch under one of the blankets from the closet. Her eyes were closed, but I doubted she was asleep. People can close their eyes without resting, especially when their mind is still spinning. I took the armchair across from her and kept the shotgun within reach. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 1 and then 2. Every creak of the cabin, Every shift of the wind outside had me listening harder. It was close to 3 when I thought I heard something faint in the distance. At first I told myself it was just the wind or a branch snapping under the weight of leftover rain. But then it came again. A low, slow, crunching sound like tires rolling over gravel. I rose quietly, moving to the window beside the door. The porch light cast a weak glow just enough to see the edge of the driveway. The sound grew a little louder, and a moment later I caught a glimpse of movement through the trees. 2 beams of light, faint but steady, cutting across the dark. I didn't need to guess whose headlights those were. I turned back toward Claire, who was now sitting up the blanket slipping off her shoulders. "What is it?" she asked, her voice already knowing the answer. I kept my voice calm. "Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone but me." Her eyes were wide, but she nodded. I reached for the shotgun, the weight of it solid in my hands. If Evan had followed us all the way out here, he was either desperate or reckless enough to think the woods would work in his favor. He was wrong, because out here there were no neighbors to impress, no bystanders to charm. Just him, me, and the kind of quiet that made every bad decision echo twice as loud. The beams of light crawled closer, weaving slightly as the vehicle made its way down the narrow gravel lane. Whoever was driving was going slow, like they were trying to make sure they didn't miss the turnoff to the cabin. I stayed by the window, my hand resting on the stock of the shotgun, and watched until the headlights finally broke into the open stretch of driveway. The vehicle stopped just short of the porch lights, reached the engine, idling low. Claire was on her feet now, standing a few steps behind me. "It's him, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to be sure. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure stepped out. Even in the half-light, I recognized the way he carried himself, broad-shouldered chin slightly forward, that same predatory posture I'd seen back in the street. He lingered by the car for a few seconds before starting toward the cabin, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Claire," I said, keeping my eyes on him, "go to the bedroom in the back. Close the door and lock it. Don't come out unless I call you." Her hand brushed my arm for just a moment, a silent plea, but she nodded and backed away without arguing. I waited until I heard the faint click of the bedroom door before turning my full attention to the man outside. Evan stopped at the base of the porch steps. "Evening," he said, his voice smooth, almost polite. It was the same voice he probably used to talk his way out of trouble. "You shouldn't be here." I told him, my tone even. "I'm just here to talk to Claire," he said, spreading his hands slightly. "That's all. I think you've misunderstood what happened tonight." I tightened my grip on the shotgun, not aiming it yet, but making sure he saw it. "What I understand," I said, "is that you followed her to my house, tried to block us in the street, and now you've driven out here in the middle of the night. That's not someone trying to talk. That's someone looking for trouble." His eyes flicked to the shotgun, then back to my face. "You're overreacting. I was worried about her. She wasn't answering my calls because she didn't want to talk to you," I said sharply. "And you showing up here proves she was right to keep it that way." He shifted his weight, his jaw tightening. "She's my girlfriend. I have a right to see her. You don't have a right to scare her. Follow her or put your hands on her," I said, stepping forward until I was on the top step. "You're leaving now." For a moment I thought he might listen. His eyes darted back to his car, and I could see the thought crossing his mind. But then something in him hardened. "If she doesn't come out and talk to me, he'll just wait right here until she does," he said. I raised the shotgun slightly, not pointing it at him, but making the message clear. "You wait here, and the police will be waiting for you before the sun comes up." His mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You wouldn't call them. You don't want that kind of scene out here." "You think I care about a scene?" I said. "Try me." We stood there in the damp night air, the only sound the soft hiss of his engine, and the occasional drip of rainwater from the porch roof. He was testing me, trying to read whether I'd actually follow through. I didn't break eye contact. Finally, he took a step back. "Fine," he said, his tone dripping with false calm. "But you tell her this isn't over. She can't just disappear on me." I stayed on the porch as he walked back to his car. The door slammed harder than it needed to, and the tires spat gravel as he backed out onto the narrow lane. His taillights disappeared into the trees, but I didn't move until the sound of his engine faded completely. When I finally turned around, Claire was standing in the hallway, her eyes wide. "Did he leave?" she asked. "For now," I said, setting the shotgun back against the wall. "But I don't trust him to stay gone." She swallowed hard. "What are we going to do?" I motioned for her to sit. "Tomorrow morning we're going into town. You're filing a police report, and we're going to make sure there's a paper trail in case he tries this again." She looked uncertain. "What if he comes back tonight? Then he's going to regret it," I said, not bothering to soften my tone. I locked the front door and double-checked the windows before sitting back in the armchair. Claire curled up on the couch again, her blanket pulled tight around her. I kept watch every creak of the old cabin, making my ears sharpen. The woods outside were still again, but I knew the quiet was temporary. Men like Evan didn't let go easily, and the way he'd looked at me tonight told me one thing: this was far from over, and the next time he showed up he might not be alone. The rest of the night stretched on like a long, taut wire ready to snap. Every tick of the clock on the cabin wall seemed louder than the one before. I stayed in the armchair by the front door, my body stiff, my ears tuned to every small sound. Outside, Claire had dozed off at some point, but it was the restless kind of sleep where she'd shift and murmur every few minutes, never truly sinking into rest. I didn't blame her. My own mind wouldn't settle either. I kept replaying the way Evan had looked at me before he left. It wasn't the glare of someone who'd been bested. It was the kind of stare that said he'd already decided he was coming back, that this was just a pause, not an end. Men like him didn't retreat, they regrouped, and that meant we had a small window to decide our next move before he made his around 4 a.m. I got up and went to the small desk in the corner of the cabin. My friend kept a basic landline phone there for emergencies, and I lifted the receiver, pressing it to my ear. The dial tone was steady. I scribbled down the sheriff's office number from a laminated card pinned to the wall. I didn't call, not yet. My gut told me that if we called them before we had more than just, "He followed us," they'd drive out here, talk to him, and send him on his way with a warning that would only make him angrier. No, we needed more proof, a record, something that would stick. I turned back toward Claire. She'd woken again and was watching me through half-open eyes. "You're not going to sleep, are you?" she asked, her voice groggy. "Not tonight," I said, sitting back down. "You should try, though. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She pushed the blanket down and sat up. "I don't want to close my eyes and wake up to him outside again." I understood that feeling, too. Well, both keep watch, I said. For the next hour, we sat in silence, the dim light from the lamp throwing soft shadows across the room. The woods outside were still almost unnervingly so. Finally, just before dawn, a faint light began to seep through the curtains. The rain had stopped completely, leaving behind that wet, heavy smell that always clung to the morning air in these parts. Once the sky was fully pale, I stood and stretched my back, cracking from the long hours in the chair. "Well, leave in 30 minutes, I told her. "Well, head into town, file the report, and you can stay at my place for a while." "Well, make arrangements from there." She nodded, but there was a shadow in her expression. "You really think the police will help?" "They'll have to," I said more firmly than I felt. "Once there's a report, he won't be able to claim this is just a misunderstanding. We packed what little we had, 2 bags, a coat for each of us, and locked up the cabin. I made sure the shotgun was secure in the truck before we left. As I turned the key in the ignition, I took one last look down the gravel lane. Empty. No sign of tire tracks except our own from last night. That should have been comforting, but it only made me uneasy. The drive back toward town was quiet. The morning mist clung low to the fields, and the rising sun cast long streaks of gold across the wet road. Claire kept looking at her phone, even though the cracked screen made it almost unusable. She finally sighed and set it down. "No messages," she said, like she half expected him to have sent an apology or some kind of excuse. "That's good," I said. "Means he's keeping his distance. For now." We reached town just after 8 and drove straight to the sheriff's office. The building was small, tucked between a post office and a hardware store, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Inside, a receptionist with tired eyes handed us a clipboard and told us to wait. When it was our turn, a deputy in his early 40s called us into a small room. He listened as Claire told him everything, how the fight started, how Evan had followed her, how he'd shown up at my house and then at the cabin. I added what I'd seen, making sure to describe his car, his height, his build. The deputy took notes, nodding occasionally, but his expression stayed neutral. When we were done, he set his pen down. "He'll file this," he said. "If he contacts you again or shows up anywhere near you, call us right away. We can issue a trespass notice, and if he violates it, we can take further action." I wanted more than further action, but I bit back the frustration. At least there would be something on paper now. Claire signed the report and we left. On the way to my house, we stopped at a small diner for breakfast. Claire barely touched her food, just kept stirring her coffee. "Do you think he's really going to stop?" she asked. I shook my head. "I think he's going to wait until he thinks your guard is down. That's why we're not giving him that chance." When we got home, I double-checked every lock on the doors and windows. I moved the truck into the garage and closed it tight. Claire settled into the guest room, but I could tell she was still restless. Around noon, I went out to check the mailbox. Inside, there was a plain white envelope with no return address. My name was written on the front in blocky, uneven letters. I opened it right there on the porch. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words written in black marker. "She's going to call me." The handwriting wasn't just messy. It was aggressive, the kind that dug into the paper. My first thought was, how did he know we were here? My second thought was that this wasn't just about Claire anymore. This was a man trying to prove he could get to us wherever we went. I stepped back inside, closing the door behind me. Claire looked up from the couch, her expression changing the moment she saw the paper in my hand. "What is it?" she asked. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. "Nothing we can't handle," I said, though my mind was already working through our next move. Because now it was clear Evan wasn't done, and neither was I. I sat down at the kitchen table with that folded piece of paper still in my pocket. I could feel it there, a small weight that somehow carried more threat than if he had been standing on the porch himself. The fact he'd managed to leave it without either of us hearing a thing made my skin crawl. This wasn't just persistence, it was calculation. He'd been close enough to the house to drop it off and bold enough to do it in daylight. Claire walked in, holding a mug of tea. She tried to hand me one, but her hand trembled just enough to make the liquid ripple. "You're not telling me something?" she said. I sighed, set the mug down, and pulled the note from my pocket. I placed it on the table between us. She stared at it for a long moment, then leaned back in her chair. "He was here," she said flatly. "Yes," I answered. "And if he's watching the house, we have to assume he knows more than we thought." Her eyes darted toward the window, as if she expected to see him standing there. "What are we supposed to do?" "We went to the police, and they basically told us to wait until he does something worse." I understood her frustration, it mirrored my own, but I also knew that waiting was exactly what Evan wanted. The law would only help us after the fact. We needed to stop him from getting that chance. "We're going to change the way we play this," I said. You're not going anywhere alone, and I'm setting up cameras. If he comes back, we'll have proof. Proof means he won't be able to just talk his way out of it." She nodded, but there was still fear in her eyes. "And until then, we live our lives," I said, trying to sound steadier than I felt. After lunch, I drove to the hardware store in town and bought 2 wireless security cameras, extra locks and motion sensor lights. The clerk made some small talk about trouble with raccoons when he saw the pile of equipment, and I just nodded along. I wasn't about to explain that my raccoon walked on 2 legs and wrote threatening notes. Back home, I spent the afternoon installing the camera zone aimed at the driveway, the other covering the backyard. Claire stayed inside, but I could see her shadow passing the windows as she paced. When I finished, I showed her the feed on my phone. Now, if he even so much as slows down in front of the house. "Well, no." She managed a faint smile. "Feels a little better," she admitted. That night I cooked dinner, but neither of us ate much. Every car that passed outside made us both glance toward the front window. Around 8, the phone rang. Claire froze, staring at it. I checked the caller ID unknown number. I let it ring until the machine picked up. The voice that came through was calm, deliberate, and far too familiar. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," Evan said. "Tell Claire to call me. She knows my number." Then the line went dead. Claire's face went pale. "He's not going to stop?" she said. I played the message back and saved it. "Good," I said. "Now we've got his voice on record." We tried to settle in for the night, but it felt like sleeping with the lights off in a storm. You never knew when the next strike would come. I left the lamp on in the living room, the shotgun propped against the wall. Claire slept in the guest room with the door locked, though I doubted she'd really rest. Around midnight, the motion sensor light in the driveway flared on. My phone buzzed with the alert from the camera, and I pulled it up instantly. There he was, Evan standing just beyond the light, looking straight at the camera lens. He didn't move, didn't try to hide. He just stood there for a full 10 seconds before stepping back into the dark and out of view. My blood was pounding in my ears. That wasn't an accident. That was him sending a message. I went to Claire's room and knocked softly. "Stay inside," I told her. "Don't come out unless I tell you." I called the sheriff's office right then, gave them my address, and told them I had a trespasser who'd already been warned once. They said a deputy would be out as soon as possible. I stayed by the window, shotgun in hand, watching for any sign of movement. 15 minutes later, headlights appeared, this time from a marked patrol car. The deputy got out and searched the property, but found nothing. I showed him the footage, and he nodded grimly. "Well, file this with the report from yesterday," he said. "If he comes back again, we can escalate it." After the deputy left, I locked every door again and checked the cameras one more time. Empty. But I knew it was only a matter of time before he made his next move, and each time he came back, he was getting bolder. The question wasn't if he'd return. It was how far he'd be willing to go when he did. Morning came too early, the thin light creeping through the curtains like it was trying not to wake us. I hadn't slept at all. My eyes felt heavy, but my mind was too sharp, too restless. Claire walked into the kitchen looking almost the same, her hair pulled back in a loose tie, her face pale and drawn. She poured herself a cup of coffee without saying a word, and sat at the table, her hands cupped around the mug like it was the only thing holding her steady. "You checked the cameras?" she asked finally. "First thing I did," I said. "Nothing after the deputy left. He stayed away for now." She gave a small nod, but didn't look convinced. The truth was, I wasn't convinced either. Men like Evan didn't just take a night off and rethink their choices. They used the time to figure out a new approach. I had the note, the voicemail, and now the camera footage, but all of it felt like pieces of a puzzle that wasn't complete, yet I knew I had enough to get him in trouble. But trouble wasn't the same as gone. I didn't want a night or two of peace. I wanted this over. After breakfast, I called the deputy who'd come out the night before and asked if they could issue the trespass notice now. He said they'd process it that afternoon, but he added the part I didn't want to hear. Evan still had to be served the notice in person. Until then, it was just paper sitting in a file. Claire listened to the call from the table, her eyes fixed on me. "So until they hand it to him, he can still come here," she said. "Legally?" "Yes," I admitted, "but if he does well, catch him again. And every time he comes back, it's another nail in his coffin." She didn't seem comforted. I couldn't blame her. By midday, the sun had burned off the morning haze. I decided we both needed to get out of the house for a while. Sitting in the same rooms all day, waiting for something to happen, was eating away at us. We drove into town to pick up a few groceries and some extra batteries for the cameras. It felt strange walking down the store aisles pretending this was a normal errand. Every time the door chimed, I found myself glancing toward it, expecting to see Evan's face. On the drive home, I caught Claire looking in the side mirror more than once. Still worried, I asked. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Even when I don't see him, I feel like he's there." That was the thing about fear. It wasn't always about what was in front of you. It was about what could be just around the corner. When we pulled into the driveway, the front porch looked exactly as we'd left it, but the moment I stepped onto the porch, I noticed something. A deep scuff mark across the wooden step, like someone had dragged their heel there deliberately. It wasn't there this morning. I crouched down, studying it. It was faint but fresh enough that the wood fibers still had that raw look to them. Claire came up behind me. "What is it?" "Could be nothing," I said, though my gut told me otherwise. "Or it could mean he's been here while we were gone." Her breath caught. "While we were in town, maybe," I said. "Well, check the cameras." Inside. I pulled up the feed on my phone. At 11:42 a.m. there he was, Evan walking right up the steps, looking straight into the lens with that same smug expression he'd worn the night before. He stayed for less than a minute before walking back down and out of frame. No knocking, no calling, just enough to let us know he'd been here. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. "This is getting worse." I saved the clip immediately and forwarded it to the deputy with a short message. "Has escalating." 10 minutes later, the deputy called back. "We're serving the trespass notice today," he said. "If he comes back after that, well, arrest him. Until then, stay put and keep the doors locked." The word "stay put" felt like a prison sentence. We were already locked in, watching the world through a screen, waiting for the next move. The rest of the day passed in a strange half-silence. Claire stayed, mostly in her room. The door cracked just enough for me to hear the faint sound of her phone as she scrolled. I stayed in the living room, alternating between watching the camera feed and staring out the window like I could will him to appear so it could be over. It was almost sunset when the phone rang again. This time the deputy. "We served him," he said. "He didn't take it well. Slammed the door in my face. But he's been told if he shows up at your place again, it's a violation." I thanked him and hung up. Claire came out of her room, eyes questioning. "Well, he's been served," I said. "If he comes back now, it's not just a threat, it's an arrest." For the first time all day, her shoulders loosened slightly. "So maybe this is the start of it ending." "Maybe," I said, though I kept the rest of my thoughts to myself. Men like Evan didn't always care about consequences until they were forced to, and judging by the look in his eyes in those camera clips, he hadn't been forced yet. We ate dinner in the living room, the news murmuring in the background. Outside, the last light faded and the motion sensor lights clicked on. I watched them glow for a long time, half expecting to see that familiar shadow in their reach. The night passed quietly, almost too quietly, and as I sat there, I realized the worst part wasn't the noise he made when he showed up. It was the silence that came before. 2 more days passed without a sign of him. No footsteps on the porch, no unknown numbers calling, no shadow lingering in the cameras. glow, it should have been a relief, and for Claire I think it was, she started sleeping through the night again, and her voice didn't carry that constant edge of panic when she spoke. But for me, the quiet was something I watched closely. I'd learned that sometimes quiet wasn't peace. It was just the breath someone took before they came back harder. On the third morning, I checked the cameras like I always did. The driveway was empty, the backyard still. I let out a slow breath. I didn't even know I'd been holding Claire. Came into the kitchen, her hair still messy from sleep, and poured herself a cup of coffee. "Think he's finally done?" she asked, almost hopeful. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe he's realized he can't win." I didn't tell her that. I'd sent every piece of evidence we had, the note, the voicemail, the footage, to the deputy, and had them saved in 3 different places. If Evan came back, there'd be no more warnings, no more games. It would be over the moment he set foot on the property. By the end of that week, the tension in the Pound house had eased enough that we could laugh again, even if it was just over small things. Claire started making plans, new job applications, looking at apartments in different parts of the state. She was moving forward, and I knew that was the most important thing. Whatever else happened, she was taking her life back. The day she finally packed her bag to leave for a friend's place 3 hours away, I carried it to the truck for her. She hugged me a little tighter than usual before getting in. "Thanks for everything, Dad," she said quietly. "Just promise me one thing," I told her. "Never go back to him. Not for any reason." She nodded, and for the first time I believed she meant it. I stood in the driveway watching until her car disappeared around the bend, the dust settling slowly behind her. When I went back inside, the house felt different, not empty, but lighter, like some heavy shadow had finally lifted. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window looking out at the stillness beyond the yard. I didn't know if Evan had finally given up or if he was just somewhere out there nursing his pride. But I did know this: he'd never again get the chance to stand on my porch and try to take something from me or from her. And that was enough. If you found yourself caught up in this story and want to hear more true-to-life tales where justice wins out and the truth comes to light, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps bring you more stories like this, stories that remind us to stand our ground and protect the people who matter most.